So the other thing I'm real proud of at Epsilon is our willingness to invest in people, in technology, and data, all the things that enable us to be innovative for you, our customers. And a good example of that is investment is our guest speaker tonight, Tom Edwards. He's our Chief Digital Officer at the agency of Epsilon. And his full-time job is to look into the future, to spend time blazing a trail, looking at what's next. And he's going to give us an insight tonight into what to expect as a consumer experience, how that's going to affect us personally, and how that's going to affect our fitness businesses. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom.
Thanks, Greg. All right, I'm incredibly excited to be here. It's been a busy week. So this past week, I was at South by Southwest doing a talk on artificial intelligence. Saturday, did a TEDx talk on this whole idea, the evolution of experience, which we're going to get into today. But I'm actually most excited about this talk. No other venue can you actually have a panda like actually here kind of roaming around. So I think that really, really cool. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a brief look into the very near future. So what I'm going to do is I've got a lot of kind of proprietary research that I'm going to wrap into how technology actually impacts consumer behavior and how those behaviors are going to shift and evolve how we interact with technology. So I'm going to start with a few series of questions. So what do you actually start and end your day with? What captures memories? What connects you to your friends? What unlocks endless entertainment options? Everybody got a guess yet? We're getting there? Right? Getting there? What tracks your fitness activity, visualizes it for you? Yeah? It's your mobile device. So if it's not already in your hand, I want you to take it out for a minute and really just look at it for just a second. Think about your relationship with it, right? You're holding more computing power in your hands than any generation before us, and this is just really the beginning. So we're going to take a short look into the future, and by the end of this talk, I'm going to give you the actual date, the year, in which mobile technology, the phone in your hand, is no longer going to be the primary way where you interact and interface with technology. Think about that. You should probably check it 100 times a day, right? So can you imagine a time when you're not going to actually need it? Well, it's coming a lot faster than you think, and consumer behavior is driving a lot of that moving forward. So before we get to the future, I always like to start in the past, right? Huge Star Wars fan. So growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, kind of dating myself a little bit there, I loved Star Wars. I loved how the technology seemed to enable and empower the main characters every step of the way. But I didn't want to be Han Solo or Luke Skywalker. Oh no. I wanted to know how R2-D2 and C-3PO actually worked. That to me was like the coolest part, like all the technology part. But growing up in the 80s, didn't really quite meet my expectations for Star Wars, right? I'm still a big gamer, right? Love giant robot TV shows, kind of a geek by trade. If you haven't figured this out yet by now, before the Star Wars slide, that kind of gets you going. But it's important to understand, because gaming in the 80s was self-contained. There's no Xbox Live, there's no co-op play. When you think about television shows, it was all predetermined. If I missed an episode of my favorite show, I'd have to wait a month to catch up. And obviously computing was incredibly basic, no pun intended there. It's really a joke for more of a tech crowd, but it's okay, you get it. So as we move into the 90s, there's a little bit of hope, right? We see connectivity, right? Everybody remember the AOL dial-up sign? Anybody got dial-up sound? Anybody have that on their phone as their ringtone? Anybody? Anybody? Oh, come on. All right. So we also begin to see the rise of the graphical user interface. And we really begin to see this beginning of shift towards mobility, the mobile device. And it's kind of funny. So I actually got my first mobile phone in 1998. So thinking back through that. And we begin to see this kind of acceleration of mobile devices, right? We see different form factors, different kind of functionality, different features that kind of came through. And so, and obviously in the mid-2000s, my all-time favorite phone, the Motorola Razr. All right, who had a Razr? You want to raise your hand? Oh yeah, look at the crowd. Yeah. Remember trying to text with that? The 3 numbers and the 3 letters, right? This is a really key point around innovation and how we adopt technology. So when you think about the Motorola Razr, you start to think about the fact that true innovation and disruption comes with removing a barrier. right? So just keep that in mind. And it also comes from building on something that's familiar. So in 2007, we get the original iPhone. Who had the original iPhone? 2007? Yeah? A couple people? Why did this matter? One, you had kind of this really unique user interface. It was touch-based. It was a consolidation of a bunch of different device types into one, right? Which is cool. But I would actually argue the bigger innovation was actually the App Store. And here's why. So in 2008, Apple launched the App Store. That allowed third parties to create an ecosystem. That allowed you to personalize your device and the experience. For the first time, you as an individual consumer had full control, right? So you could actually take and do that. So this disruption eliminates a barrier. As we go through the mid-2000s, we start to see something happen. We start to see people becoming empowered. We see 5 years after the launch of the iPhone, 1 in 5 people then owned a smartphone. 1 in 5. Now today, 95% of people own a mobile device. 77% of those are smartphones here in the US. That's ubiquity, right? And what happens when you have ubiquity? Ubiquity equals accessibility. So we have access. We have access to create. We have access to amplify our messaging. We have access to influence. So this accessibility, you start looking at the rise of user-generated content in 2008. Anybody remember Charlie Bit My Finger? Anybody? Yeah? Yeah? All right. So in 2009, many people don't actually realize this, but when Sully's plane crashed into Hudson, that was actually first reported via Twitter. And that fundamentally changes our expectation as consumers to have real-time information, right? Now, we can't go more than a couple minutes. If a news story is broken, it's all across, everybody gets it, everybody understands. And a lot of you are using social today. It's still a great way to connect with consumers. Then, as marketers, brands became conversational. In 2011, though, we begin to see a shift. Celebrity begins to move. Influence no longer is just coming from Hollywood. It's shifting into consumer-created or co-created experiences here. Anybody remember Rebecca Black? Anybody want to stand up and sing a couple bars from Friday? Oh, I know there's somebody in here. You just, okay, it's a safe space. It's okay, really. 2012, we begin to see this rise of visual expression. So we get memes. Moving down the line, 2013, we see the shift in how we start interacting in terms of visual storytelling. Our attention span is getting smaller. So what ends up happening is, I always kind of liken it back to, growing up as kids, we like picture books. Well, now as adults, we're kind of like the same way. There's this whole rise of visual storytelling. You've heard about atomized content or thumb-stopping creative. That really came to fruition in 2013. 2014, we begin to see this shift as marketers towards mobile first. You have companies like Facebook putting a stake in the ground, saying we're going to be a mobile-first organization, and everything we do is going to be mobile. So we've seen this shift from desktop to mobile. And just remember that. Just hold that thought for a little bit. And obviously now we're beginning to see shifts in how we interact with technology. We're seeing the rise of intelligent systems. 2016 was all about the year of the chatbot, where you could basically work within a chat with a bot from an asynchronous or just in real time. 2017 was all about Alexa and voice services. And we're going to talk a lot about the role voice is going to play in the evolution of experience. It's one of 3 key components to consider as we're moving forward. But the key point here to remember is that accessibility equals empowerment, okay? All right, now, I always like to put guardrails up because as we're looking into the future, we have to be able to categorize things. We have to be able to understand how do we take and look at things like artificial intelligence compared to augmented reality, compared to virtual reality, compared to mixed reality, compared to all these other quote-unquote realities. So what I like to do is I like to look at 3 core things. I've kind of broken it up into these 2 things. There's technology that empowers. That's essentially technology that enables you to do something, or there's a specific behavior tied to that. The second is exponential technology. That is where we're going to see leaps and bounds moving forward for how our environment, and here's kind of the spoiler of this whole thing. We're moving to a time where our environment is going to adapt to us, and we're no longer inputting into the environment. That's a really, really key kind of statement here. And the last is enhanced. When you talk about all these different iterations of reality, to me, it's not about extending reality or augmenting reality, it's enhancing reality. So we're going to get into those kind of 3 core areas as our filters and kind of guideposts as we look at how this evolution of experience is going to occur. All right, we're going to start with empower. So I have 3 Gen Zs. These are my kids. I've got a 15, a 13, and a 10-year-old. Yep. So thinking about Gen Z for just a second and looking at their specific behaviors, I'm going to talk a lot about Gen Z in particular, and I'm going to ladder it back across generations as we kind of go through this. But Gen Z is the first mobile-first generation. They learn to swipe before they learn to speak. And when you look at their behaviors and what they expect from experiences, that's going to have a significant impact on how technology is going to evolve over the course of the next, 5 to 10 years. Really, really important to understand. You look at their behaviors. They spend 2.5 hours a day on-demand content. That's either, on-demand streaming services. You look at Netflix, it's on YouTube. It's like watching existing on-demand content. 1.5 hours a day gaming. Store that one away. There's a whole other conversation I could have with you about esports. We'll save that for another time. Speaking of which, my 15-year-old actually, he wants to be an esports athlete. So he's trying to convince my wife, hey, this is like the great way to go, right? And he's like, it's athletics of the mind. Like, wait for that to hit, right? Yeah. Anyway, we're still in negotiations here. But anyway, as you think about this, and they spend 51 minutes a day with music, why am I talking about Gen Z right now? By 2020, Gen Z is going to represent 40% of consumers. 40%. So from a fitness perspective, every single industry is going to be impacted by this. And the expectations, you're already seeing it across other industries. You're seeing declines in viewership of live television. You're seeing this rapid immersive rise in terms of esports, where you've got 300 million people, 300 million, watching game streams. Just watching, not necessarily even playing. So it's incredibly important to understand that the impact, there's an expectation for on-demand content. There's an expectation that the camera is going to become the new home screen. There's an expectation that YouTube is a remote control. And there's an automatic innate desire for 3-dimensional augmented reality experiences. So we'll touch on that as well. So how then is experience going to continue to evolve? Many of you are probably already creating video content, right? 75% of the content that's actually consumed online is video content. One of the things that's actually shifting and changing, though, is this concept of nonlinear video. It's giving the user control. There are 2 ways this works. One is through branching. Remember those old choose-your-own-adventure books from whenever you were a kid? So you could basically pick and choose. This allows for kind of faux personalization for the experience for the user, because they feel like they're in control of the experience. The other is through this kind of idea of contextual hotspots. But over time, you're going to see video becoming much more interactive than it is today. You get much higher engagement whenever it's nonlinear here as well, and you give control. The second thing to really understand from a behavioral standpoint is that social messaging has far surpassed social media. And that may seem counterintuitive, but in 2016, social messaging applications on an average user basis surpassed traditional broad open social channels. And there's a reason behind this. It feels safe to the user. It's a single-threaded conversation. It's something that the user feels like they have more control. And you're even seeing it now implemented. This is an example of YouTube recently integrating messaging into their core experience. Having the ability to connect with a consumer in a one-to-one way, there's an expectation. You have 69% of millennials that expect to be able to talk to a brand 24 hours a day, regardless. So you think about what that impacts for customer service or questions when it comes to membership or retention or any of these things. You have to account for both real-time as well as what's called asynchronous communication, and be able to leverage these channels to do that, because that's a part of how you actually are enabling the users. Here's another kind of fun thought for you. 69% of Gen Z also is 1996 to 2010. So if I didn't state that already, that's what that is. 69% view the camera as a platform to create from. 66% of them have their own YouTube channel. So with millennials, there was this whole idea of co-creation, to where brands would work with specific influencers, create content, etc. With this generation, it shifted from co-creation to full creation. So in order to connect, it's about enabling their creative experiences, not just positioning your branded content. It's a significantly different way of thinking about how we interact. And what's happening now is you're beginning to see these shifts in platforms. You see what's on the screen now is Animojis, obviously, from Apple. For those not familiar, you can basically put your face in, and it kind of, the cat will mimic your facial movements. But this is important to understand. because enabling and empowering organizations like Apple, as well as Facebook and others, are focusing on providing the tools to allow you to create experiences that empower the creation of these individuals. So again, empowering creation is incredibly important. Providing the semblance of control is incredibly important. Okay? And so then we start thinking about the fact that 83% of Gen Z, 83% has used an augmented reality filter. And in my research, it's not just Gen Z. 53% of millennials are actually open to wearing augmented reality glasses. Not necessarily as cool with having an implant. I guess one too many Black Mirror episodes. Not really down with that. But what's important is, remember that statistic I mentioned before about Apple and adoption? 5 years later, 1 in 5 people had a smartphone. You're going to start seeing a rapid adoption of AR as a means to actually drive connection and experience, because the hardware is catching up. I was at South by Southwest last week. I met with a number of different startups. One of them is working on basically delivering augmented reality experiences via the browser. So I was doing augmented reality, 6-8 years ago, did a big campaign with Volkswagen. It was so complex because you had to have an app, you had to have the animation pre-baked, you had to have all of these steps set up forward, and then the user still had to open it off of like a tag to basically initiate the experience. Now it's all delivered directly through the browser because the hardware is sophisticated enough to deliver the experience. So you're going to be seeing more and more democratization of augmented reality and connecting physical and digital with the real world. And that's important. And you're already beginning to see it pop up in the fitness industry. So you're seeing examples of different startups and different organizations that are incorporating, AR type of activities, basically putting game elements into augmented reality as kind of that initial step into how it's going to connect into fitness. And that's one way that it's going to connect. While I was at CES earlier in January, I also saw the Black Box VR experience. Who's seen the Black Box VR experience? Who's seen this? Basically what's happened is Black Box has created a gym-type experience within virtual reality. So they have kind of special hardware that you can take and complete an entire workout, compete against other people. And that's okay. But there are kind of a couple things that you need to think about when it comes to the application of VR. So VR, one of the inherent problems with virtual reality is that it can be kind of limiting to you as an individual. Have you ever been in a room with somebody with a headset on and they're having like the greatest time of their life, and you're like kind of sitting there watching them act like, writhing around, make fun of them? Well, one of the things that Facebook is really focused on, Facebook is all about connection, and they want to take this idea of presence and connect that through virtual environments to where people in virtual reality becomes more of a social space. So as you're thinking about the application of social, and you think about the success of, say, like Peloton and some of the other kind of entities that kind of pull together different worlds of content into experiences, this is something that Facebook is all in terms of driving this forward. They have a thing called Facebook Spaces. They've been experimenting with the Samsung Gear headset and kind of driving this forward. But Google's response to this is basically to share the internal experiences through co-viewing. So just like you can take, for those of you who have a Mac, you can throw it on your Apple TV, or if you've got Chromecast, you can kind of throw an image up on, or a movie or whatever on a screen. Their view is, how can we take and share and democratize the VR experience? So it's not only about the different realities that we've touched on so far, augmented or virtual, but look at the underlying point here. It's about connection, right? It's about the social aspect of these experiences and how you can bridge the two while also giving users control, but understanding this idea of creation as well. So that's just a brief glimpse into technologies that are going to empower consumers moving forward. Now, the second filter is exponential. So this is where we start getting into artificial intelligence. This is where we start getting into this idea of how are these experiences going to kind of be supercharged moving forward. And people have kind of funny misconceptions around what AI actually is, right? Everybody who, seen, whether it was the Avengers with Ultron, remember the super intelligence, the super AI, the Matrix turning us all into batteries. A lot of our views around artificial intelligence comes from entertainment. But the reality is, most AI is really about intelligence augmentation for us. So it's more about the systems, how they're going to enhance us. So I'm going to give a little bit of a primer on AI so everybody kind of understands. There's artificial narrow intelligence, which is essentially things like, you think like Alexa, right? You think of things that have a very specific knowledge base in which they can answer and respond to questions, but it's not super intelligent yet. There's artificial general intelligence. Think about this if Alexa could answer any specific question that you asked it in the right context, right? That's general. Super intelligence, basically, it's all over at that point. I'm just kidding. But there are three primary reasons why we're seeing this rapid rise in AI. The first and probably the most important is data, right? So everybody's heard of big data, but do you realize that we've created 10 trillion gigabytes of data in the last 12 months? 10 trillion. In order to process that information, be able to apply that to business, you have to have systems that can take and process and analyze that information. The second reason is around kind of the algorithms. So you've had rapid advancement in the ability to process information. Who's heard of machine learning? It's all over the trades, but raise your hand. Okay. Machine learning is simply human-coded algorithms. That's some human somewhere has taken and created a model to basically take and process a lot of information. That's really, at the end of the day, what machine learning is all about. Deep learning, you can think about like AlphaGo, which was a system that actually trained itself to go forward and beat itself. So as we think about, and the third one, obviously, it's costs of graphical processing units, but that's not as interesting as the first two. But it's there. It's the third one. So we completed the cycle. But with AI in particular, it's really about how can we take and basically apply convenience to our lives. When I talk across generations, when I talk to Gen Z, 43%, Millennial, 53%, Gen X, 42%, there's one prevailing thought that comes through loud and clear of their expectation for artificial intelligence types of scenarios, and that's convenience and ease of use. So as long as it makes their lives easier, they're much more open and willing to actually let it in. So, and it's already in your lives. So how many people own an Echo or a Google Home right now in your house right now? All right, great. So what ends up happening, there are about 35 million people right now that interact with voice assistants on kind of a monthly basis. So, and I saw another statistic the other day, it's like 1 in 5. So again, we're seeing these kind of 1 in 5 things happen. But this is incredibly important. So voice-based assistants, this whole idea of conversational interfaces and voice is incredibly important because this extends much more beyond your living room and your kitchen. What you're going to see happen, the voice service is going to continue to spread and be pervasive in almost everything. It's in your television, it's in your watch, it's in your car, it's in your kitchen. And these voice assistants are eventually going to begin to converge. So we'll talk a little bit about that moving forward, but I want to start with Alexa. So two primary voice interfaces right now. You've got Alexa voice services, you have Google Home, you also have Siri. Siri is actually one that's the most used whenever people are out and about, but it's not as friendly to brands. So the two I'm focusing on right now are the two that primarily enable connection with consumers as marketers. So when we talk about Alexa voice services, there are 30,000 skills now available. Think about a skill as a destination for your brand or your organization within kind of the Alexa voice services area. The thing about voice is that there's no visual user interface. It's all audio based. There is going to be this shift between voice and visual. We won't get into that as much today here. But when you think about the differences, Alexa owns about 70% of the total user base right now. But what's going to end up happening is Google is tied into the Google Knowledge Graph, which is tied into all of your search history and all of that. It's currently 28% of people here, but it's on 200 million devices. Google Assistant's on Android phones. It's on Apple devices. It's everywhere. And the thing that you're going to see, I sat down with the Amazon team at CES, and a couple things are going to happen. You're going to see some news popping up, or it's already actually popping now, to where both Google and Amazon are aligning payment into the voice systems. So they're trying to now connect this kind of conversational piece with the ability to drive transaction and potentially even memberships. So if you think about that whole idea of making it seamless and easy as voice becomes more pervasive, it's something to definitely consider moving forward. So we'll keep moving. So taking a quick aside before we jump into the next topic, I also teach at SMU in Dallas. So I've taught principles of marketing, consumer behavior, lots and lots of marketing classes over the last like 20 years. So in every single beginning marketing course always talks about the 4 Ps, right? Product, place, price, promotion. What I see happening because of intelligent systems, there's kind of a new 4 Ps that's emerging that you're going to have to consider in addition to product, price, place, promotion. It's psychographics, it's predictive, it's proxy, and it's pervasive. You're probably thinking to yourself, those words don't really mean anything to me yet, and you're right, but they will. So thinking about how you actually use data. So much of marketing traditionally has been built on, primary proprietary data sets about, certain demographic information about individuals, etc. One of the things that basically machine learning and artificial intelligence allows for is better aligning of affinities across different categories. You can understand perceptions, you can understand occasions, you can understand behavioral psychographics. So that's essentially understanding those behavioral elements and tie them together. And so we've done quite a bit of work here on this, and I'm happy to talk about this after if anybody has any questions on how you can look at a whole category of information of, your brand, competitive brand, then drilling into specific behaviors that map back into certain segments of individuals. But the role that data plays within artificial intelligence is incredibly key. So keep going. The number one thing and the expectation of how we're going to shift this idea is moving from this idea of real-time and contextual marketing into predictive marketing. And the way this is going to happen is through these kind of systems tied to artificial intelligence. So predictive APIs, this is the one way in which, and I'll tie all this together for you in an actual example here in just a minute, but I want to get the core concepts out of the way for you. The most important to consider and understand is this idea of the proxy web. So what this means, as each of us begins to have more dependency on our virtual assistants, they're going to become more intelligent over the next few years. They're going to be able to understand everything that's happening in your environment, and they're going to be able to start predicting certain needs on your behalf. When that happens, we're going to begin to offload our expectations and certain elements of our daily lives onto these assistants. And I'll give you an example. So say, for example, Sandy, our chief client officer here, and I want to have dinner. Basically, my proxy would connect with Sandy's proxy, and it would understand food preferences. It would know already, if I have food allergies, if the places and restaurants Sandy's already been to. Yeah, okay, I got you. Yeah, trust me, I know I'm the one between that and the out there, so I'm going quicker for you. But here's the core point. The systems understand all the food preferences, the menus, where we want to go, traffic patterns, makes the reservations, all behind the scenes. All we have to do is say that we want to go to dinner. Now, when you start applying that to expectations that people have, Gen Z expects to be able to manage personal time. Millennials expect to be able to replenish purchases. So they want to be able to they want their agents and proxies to have a wallet. They want it to be able to manage certain transactions for them. Gen X wants assistance in actually understanding finances and analyzing and managing that aspect of it. But the key thing to consider here is that people are already thinking about how these assistants will take on more aspects of their lives. And that's a really, really key point to consider. Because once it gets to a point of being pervasive and where essentially these proxies are all over, these virtual assistants are going to get to that point here within the next few years. I'm not going to get into blockchain and how it's all going to connect there, but we can talk about that at another time. But where we're going, and this is hard for certain people to understand. When you think about marketing, traditional marketing has been about marketing to the consumer, putting the consumer in the center. What's going to happen over the course of the next few years, you're going to have to consider both the individual as well as the system. You're going to be marketing and connecting and talking to a potential system. 2 different pathways forward that you have to consider. And it's something that you have to consider this role of voice moving forward. All right. The third one is the third filter that I use is enhanced reality. So this is where we're going to get into the connection of physical and digital reality, right? So what's going to happen over the course of the next few years? So I'm going to touch on computer vision, which predicted as one of the big trends of this year. I'll explain what that is and what that means. Think about your camera becoming intelligent. That's essentially computer vision. So remembering back to the Gen Z behavior that basically they expect the camera to be the home screen, that's important. Augmented reality at scale. So as we're moving forward through the next few years, you're going to see a convergence of all these things. You're going to see a convergence of voice, of vision, and touch, as well as augmented reality. And finally, it's the shift towards what we call ambient computing. That, again, is when your environment is interacting with you versus you directly interacting with your environment. So let's get started. So I kind of already gave it away to you, but we're going to shift from desktop and mobile to voice, to vision, and to touch as the primary way that technology is going to evolve consumer experience moving forward. So let's start with, okay, that's a terrible picture, sorry. This was at South by Southwest last week. So one of the standout experiences was actually from Bose. Yeah, the headphone makers and the speaker makers. They came up with an augmented reality audio experience that was really kind of compelling. And when you think about this from a fitness perspective, anybody on the V? The V? No? All right. So when you think about the role that audio is going to play, before I went to South by Southwest, I didn't really think about this as an ancillary bridge into fully immersive. I always assumed we'd go straight into, eyeglasses or contacts that project out augmented reality. But going back to the Bose example, you can tell there by my ear, there are audio cues. There was no visual element to the augmented reality. It was all audio-based, voice-based. I could look at a specific area, and it would trigger an audio response back to me. So it would trigger something about a review of a restaurant or a specific location or anything like that. So you can start thinking about this, and this exists now in the fitness industry too with the V. So with the V, it actually serves as a running assistant. So as you're out on a run, it basically tracks and adapts. It's tracking your heart rate through your ear. It's got a heart rate monitor directly embedded within the ear. It's not able yet, to me, for it to be a true AI, it has to be able to give personalized feedback and training tips and those types of things, and that's on their roadmap. But this is the V was one of the most funded fitness wearables across Kickstarter, and so they recently launched last year. So audio is going to play a key role. Also location. So if you think about all these augmented reality experiences that are coming, all of this immersive computing, location-based data and being able to tag specific things, just like the Bose example. If I looked at a specific location, that location exists in a physical space, but then it also has to trigger back in the audio feedback and the visual feedback. So place data is going to be incredibly important. Computer vision is going to be incredibly important as well. Computer vision is basically being able to take high-dimensional context of your environment and be able to drive decisioning and understand what's happening. And here's what happens when you combine computer vision with the voice assistant. So you can actually take and point your camera at a specific object. It'll analyze, recognize that information, and give you additional options and context for what you're going to do. So imagine somebody's going by one of your gyms, they pop up their phone, here you go, here's 5 stars, here's reviews, here's how this is all kind of coming together. But this is where we're going. The expectations of Gen Z, and this is from Google, they launched this middle of last year at their I/O Developer Conference. So, but this is something, again now, this whole idea of computer vision is incredibly important to think about how it's going to impact experience. All right. Touch is the last one. So you think about this idea of bridging physical and digital. This is where it comes down again to, it's not always going to be about a physical form factor. It's about how you can interact, and your environment becomes a sensor. Everything is going to be interconnected. So understanding that if the camera is intelligent, if I'm able to connect that to a virtual assistant that can predict my needs, and if I can use my arms and gesture to control things, you can see how we can shift from just the mobile device into another form factor, right? So this is where it gets really, really interesting, because the reality is none of those words are actually there. So it's voice, it's vision, and it's touch. And you're seeing it in the fitness industry as well. At CES, there was so much smart clothing. Two things tied to fitness really came out of CES. It was sleep. All of these devices enabled to help people and enable them to sleep, as well as natural interfaces tied to smart clothing that go well beyond what we've seen so far. So again, it's about this idea of voice, vision, and touch. And this is kind of a scarier version of this. I always like to call it synthetic reality. Imagine living in a world to where everything is a pop-up. So I'll let you kind of watch this for just a second. There's an individual on a bus looking through some type of virtual headset here. Everything essentially becomes a billboard. And here's a note for any of you with kids potentially going to college. I wish I had gone to law school for digital rights management. Think about that in the world of augmented reality. Think about all of this entire entity in here is going to be plastered wall to wall with digital types of interfaces and experiences moving forward. So as this individual is going through their day, they have many opportunities to then interact with the world around them, and it's personalized and it's contextual. You know, there's a loyalty component here as well. This individual is going to get off the bus and walk down the street. Well, you get the point, which essentially is at some point, as I mentioned before, you have millennials, you have Gen Z who are much more open to fully immersive, whether it's glasses, whether it's contacts or something else, way in which they interact with the world. As marketers, it's fun because that's like a blank canvas. I'm like, yes, score, more ways to deliver a message, let's do this. And it is a video about digital and technologies. You have to have a cat embedded in it somewhere, so there it is, right up there in the corner. So what you're going to see here in just a moment is this individual is going to go into a store. But you think about this idea of augmented reality and these other kind of mixed reality experiences. You think about how that pertains to fitness. You got the little dog here. Anyway, you get the point. You got a workout ad down there. All right. You look. There you go. All right, we'll keep moving along. So you get the general idea. We're going to shift from desktop, mobile, to voice, to vision, and to touch. Now, but how are we going to get there? How are we actually going to move towards this idea of all this kind of future cool stuff, this cool technology we've been talking about? The first, you remember how I talked about in 2008, how that massive innovation with the App Store and being able to have hundreds of apps on your phone and personalize that experience? How many of the apps on your phone do you actually use? If you have, how many? 10. Great answer. Yeah, I'll give you the 20 later. That was a perfect plan. But no, in all reality, you have hundreds of applications on your phone, but you only use 10. So the next area that's going to be disrupted is the actual App Store. As these virtual assistants become more intelligent and able to predict more of our needs, we're going to see a shift to what we're calling scenes. This is where the virtual assistant goes into the middle of the experience. Instead of you interacting with those 10 apps all the time, the virtual assistant will take and actually drive and direct whatever experience that you want moving forward. Here's an example. So right now, I have to, in order to check into a flight, in order to start my car, in order to turn on the surround sound of my home or heat my pool, those are 4 separate applications. But in this example of scene design, what actually ends up happening is the system can predict and understands that I like to check in my flight and submit me for an upgrade a couple hours before I go. So that is already automatically taken care of. It sends me a notification that it turns on my car and it's already routed the direction to the airport. So it's already seamlessly understanding the context of my situation and understand how I want to tie these things together. When I return home, I want music on in the house and I want to heat the pool for a nice evening with my family. So again, the systems will be able to predict your specific needs moving forward. And it's this whole idea of shifting to scene design. So when is all of this going to happen? So conducted research on this topic. There were many dates that were thrown out from 2021 to 2043. Discussions around form factors and mass adoption by consumers. So based on this kind of rate of exponential change and everything that I'm seeing, my personal prediction is that by 2028, 10 years from now, 10 years, that's not a long time, we're going to see this shift towards multimodal interfaces at scale. There are a lot of factors happening behind the scenes right now. There's a lot of talk around 5G connectivity. 5G is essentially going to allow all of these millions and millions of sensors to become even more connected. So, that's it. So it's either going to be through some type of contact, through some type of glass interface, or actually earbuds. So again, audio as a bridge into these experiences is already happening. We're seeing it come through to some of the emerging tech trade shows. So, and finally, it's going to allow us to enhance reality, especially when it comes to the fitness industry. Because if you can tie together voice, if you can tie voice like a voice coach in your ear as you're running or working out, if you're able to tie together vision and actually visualize other people, whether that's in a real physical location or a virtual location, if you can tie into touch, using your environment as a way to interface with technology, you're going to, in all of these systems and advance through this virtual assistant, you're going to enhance reality. All right. So that is it. So we have started down this path. We looked at all of these kind of previous behaviors leading into expectations that people have, leading into how those expectations are going to translate into emerging technology experiences. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.